Hook. Vincent DeLuca solved the complex differential equation in 17 seconds flat, his silver pen moving across the napkin with surgical precision, while Claire Sullivan stood frozen in disbelief, realizing the dangerous man she'd been cleaning house for possessed a brilliant mind she never imagined. Consequence. In that moment, both the former mathematics professor turned housekeeper and the second-generation crime boss understood their carefully constructed facades had just shattered, revealing truths that would change everything between them forever. Drop your city in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Let's dive into the story. 3 hours earlier, Claire Sullivan had been dusting Vincent DeLuca's mahogany desk in his private study, completely unaware that her employer possessed any intelligence beyond the ability to intimidate people and run illegal operations. She'd worked as his housekeeper for 6 months, maintaining the pristine lakefront mansion, while carefully avoiding any meaningful interaction with the man who paid her generous salary. At 28, Claire had learned to keep her head down and her past buried. The once promising mathematics professor had fallen far from her tenure-track position at Northwestern University, and she wasn't about to risk her current employment by getting too familiar with a man whose business dealings she preferred not to contemplate. Vincent, at 42, commanded respect through presence alone. His silver-touched dark hair was always perfectly styled, his expensive suits immaculate, and his grey eyes missed nothing. The DeLuca family had controlled Chicago's South Side for 3 generations, and Vincent had inherited both the empire and the burden that came with it. That afternoon, Claire was organizing his personal library when Vincent entered unexpectedly, ending a phone call in rapid Italian. She'd picked up enough of the language during her work to understand fragments, something about shipping schedules and payment delays. "Miss Sullivan," he acknowledged, settling into his leather chair with the fluid grace of a predator. "Mr. DeLuca," she replied, continuing to arrange books by subject as she'd been doing all week. "Mathematics texts," she noted with surprise. "Advanced calculus, differential equations, theoretical physics. Why would a crime boss own academic textbooks?" Vincent poured himself a glass of aged whiskey and watched her work. Claire felt his scrutiny like a weight between her shoulder blades, but she'd grown accustomed to his silent observation over the months. "You're wondering about the books," he said suddenly. Claire nearly dropped the volume of advanced mathematics she was holding. "It's not my place to wonder about anything, sir. But you do anyway." It wasn't a question. Vincent rose and approached the bookshelf, standing close enough that Claire caught his cologne, something expensive and subtly masculine. "Most people assume men in my position are all muscle and no brain. I wouldn't presume to assume anything about you, Mr. DeLuca." Vincent smiled, the expression transforming his usually stern features. "Diplomatic answer. But I saw you reading the spine of that calculus text. Your eyes lingered longer than mere curiosity would warrant." Heat crept up Claire's neck. She'd been so careful to maintain her facade of simple housekeeping competence. "I should finish organizing these for you. Actually, I have a better idea." Vincent moved to his desk and scribbled something on a piece of paper. "I'm curious about something, Miss Sullivan. Solve this equation and I'll take you to dinner at the finest restaurant in Chicago." He slid the paper across the desk toward her. Claire glanced at it and felt her breath catch. It was a complex differential equation that would challenge most graduate students, the kind of problem she used to create for her advanced mathematics courses. "I'm just your housekeeper, Mr. DeLuca. I wouldn't know how to—" "Try anyway." His voice carried quiet command. "Humor me." Claire stared at the equation, her mind automatically beginning to work through the solution. Years of academic training couldn't be suppressed, even though revealing her knowledge would expose everything she'd worked to hide. Vincent leaned back in his chair, clearly expecting her to admit defeat within moments. His confident expression suggested he viewed this as entertainment, watching his simple housekeeper struggle with mathematics far beyond her presumed capabilities. But Claire couldn't resist the intellectual challenge. Her hand moved almost without conscious thought, taking the pen he offered and beginning to work through the problem on the back of the paper. The solution flowed through her mind like a familiar song. She found herself completely absorbed in the mathematical beauty of the equation, forgetting everything else: her precarious employment, her hidden past, the dangerous man watching her every move. When she finished and looked up, Vincent was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. The confident amusement had vanished, replaced by something much more intense and calculating. 15 minutes, he said quietly. You solved that in 15 minutes. Is it correct? Claire asked, suddenly aware of what she'd just revealed. Vincent picked up the paper, studying her work with obvious comprehension. Not only correct, but elegant. You used an approach I hadn't considered. He set the paper down and fixed her with that penetrating grey stare. Who are you really, Miss Sullivan? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Claire realized she'd just stepped into dangerous territory, exposing abilities that didn't match her carefully constructed identity as a simple domestic employee. I'm your housekeeper, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. No. Vincent stood slowly, moving around the desk until he was close enough to see the intelligence she could no longer hide behind her eyes. You're something else entirely. The question is, what? Vincent poured himself another whiskey, his movements deliberate and controlled, despite the revelation that had just rocked his carefully ordered world. He'd built his reputation on reading people, on detecting deception and hidden motives. Yet, for 6 months, the woman who cleaned his house, prepared his meals and maintained his sanctuary, had been hiding intellectual capabilities that rivaled his own. Sit down, Miss Sullivan. It wasn't a request. Claire remained standing, her hands clasped in front of her like a shield. I should continue with my work. Your work just became infinitely more interesting. Vincent gestured toward the leather chair across from his desk. Please. Reluctantly, Claire perched on the edge of the chair, ready to flee at the first sign of danger. She'd heard enough hushed conversations and seen enough worried faces around Vincent to understand that deception wasn't tolerated in his world. Northwestern University, Vincent said suddenly. Department of Mathematics. Professor Claire Sullivan, specializing in advanced calculus and differential equations, published papers on optimization theory, youngest professor to achieve tenure consideration in the department's history. Claire's face went pale. How did you... I make it my business to know things about people in my employ. The question is why Professor Sullivan is working as a housekeeper instead of teaching brilliant students at one of Chicago's most prestigious universities. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths and dangerous possibilities. Budget cuts, Claire said finally. My position was eliminated 2 years ago. Tenure-track jobs in mathematics are nearly impossible to find, especially for someone without decades of experience. So you chose domestic work. I chose survival, Claire corrected, lifting her chin with a pride that impressed Vincent despite himself. I have student loans, rent, basic human needs. Pride doesn't pay bills. Vincent studied her with new appreciation. The woman sitting across from him possessed not only exceptional intelligence, but also the pragmatic strength to do whatever necessary to survive. In his world, such qualities were rare and valuable. You've been observing me for 6 months, he said. What conclusions have you drawn about my business operations? That I don't want to know any details, Claire replied immediately. Ignorance is safety in situations like this. Situations like what? When someone like me accidentally learns something about someone like you. Vincent laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. Someone like me. Care to elaborate? Claire met his gaze directly for the first time since entering his employment. You're Vincent DeLuca. Your family has controlled organized activities on the South Side for 3 generations. You command respect through reputation and results, not violence, though I suspect you're capable of both when necessary. You're more intelligent than people assume, more educated than your background suggests, and more dangerous than you appear. An astute assessment. Vincent raised his glass in a mock toast. And what's your opinion of someone like me? That you're a man who inherited a world he didn't choose, but has learned to navigate with honor where possible, and efficiency where necessary. Vincent set down his glass and leaned forward. Honor. Interesting word choice. I've watched how you treat your staff, how you conduct yourself in your home, how you handle business calls when you think no one is listening. There's a code you follow, even if it's not conventional morality. And you can respect that. Claire considered carefully before answering. I can understand it. Whether I respect it depends on what you do with this knowledge you now have about me. What do you think I'll do? I think you're a man who doesn't like being deceived, even by omission. I think you value competence and honesty above almost everything else. And I think you're deciding right now whether I'm an asset or a liability. Vincent stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his study, highlighting the contrast between the scholarly books and the subtle signs of his true occupation, The safe built into the wall, the secure phone lines, the bulletproof glass that looked perfectly ordinary. Most people in my position would consider your deception grounds for immediate termination, he said without turning around. I understand. Do you? Vincent faced her again. Because I don't think you realize what this changes. You're no longer just the housekeeper who happens to be remarkably good at her job. You're Professor Sullivan, a woman whose mind could solve problems I didn't know I had. I don't want to solve your problems, Mr. DeLuca. I want to keep my job and maintain my quiet life. Too late for that. Vincent's smile held no warmth. The moment you solved that equation, you stepped into a different relationship with me. The question now is what kind of relationship that will be. The weight of his words settled over Claire like a prophecy she couldn't escape. She'd worked so hard to remain invisible, unremarkable, safe. Now she was anything but safe, and the dangerous man studying her with those calculating grey eyes held all the power to determine her fate. That evening, Claire stood in her modest apartment's kitchen, staring at the business card Vincent had given her before she left the mansion. Heavy cardstock, embossed lettering, contact information for what appeared to be a legitimate consulting firm. But she knew better now. Nothing about Vincent DeLuca was quite what it appeared to be. Her phone rang at exactly 8 o'clock. Miss Sullivan. Vincent's voice was unmistakable, even through the phone line. Mr. DeLuca. I've made reservations for tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock. I believe I promised you dinner at Chicago's finest restaurant. Claire sank into her worn sofa, understanding that this wasn't really a request. Is that wise? People will see us together outside of the employer-employee context. Let them see. I'm a businessman taking a valued associate to dinner. A valued associate, Claire repeated. Is that what I am now? That depends on you. Vincent's tone shifted, becoming more personal. I have a proposition, Professor Sullivan, one that would make better use of your considerable talents. I'm listening. Tomorrow night. We'll discuss details over dinner. After Vincent ended the call, Claire sat in her small living room, surrounded by the modest furnishings she'd accumulated since her academic career ended. Books still dominated the space, mathematics texts she couldn't bear to sell, research journals she'd once contributed to, reminder of the life she'd lost. She'd worked so hard to become invisible in Vincent's world, to be the reliable employee who kept his house running smoothly while asking no questions and making no waves. Now he saw her completely, and that visibility felt more dangerous than any threat she'd faced since leaving university. The next evening, Claire stood before her closet in something approaching panic. She owned exactly 3 dresses suitable for dining out, all of them purchased during her academic career for faculty events and conference dinners. None seemed appropriate for dinner with a man like Vincent DeLuca. She settled on a simple black dress that flattered her figure without being provocative, paired with the only good jewelry she owned, pearl earrings that had been her grandmother's. Vincent sent a car for her, not the intimidating black SUVs she'd seen at the mansion, but an elegant sedan with a driver who treated her with surprising deference. The restaurant was indeed Chicago's finest, an exclusive establishment where reservations required weeks of advance notice and dinner for 2 cost more than Claire's monthly rent. Vincent was waiting in a private dining room, immaculate in a charcoal suit that emphasized his commanding presence. Professor Sullivan. He stood as she entered, his appreciative gaze taking in her transformation from housekeeper to the intellectual she'd once been. Claire, she said, I think we're past formal titles now. Claire. The way he said her name made it sound like something precious. Vincent. They were seated at a table that afforded complete privacy, the room's acoustic design ensuring their conversation couldn't be overheard. Claire noticed such details now, the strategic positioning, the discreet security measures, the subtle signs that this was a man who planned for every contingency. You look beautiful, Vincent said as wine was served. But then you've always been beautiful. I was simply too focused on maintaining proper boundaries to acknowledge it. Heat rose in Claire's cheeks. Vincent, those boundaries no longer exist, he continued. The question is what replaces them. Claire sipped her wine, a vintage that probably cost more than her weekly salary. You mentioned a proposition. I did. Vincent leaned back, studying her with those penetrating grey eyes. My businesses, both legitimate and otherwise, generate complex problems that require sophisticated analysis, financial modeling, risk assessment, optimization strategies. The kind of work that would challenge someone with your academic background? You want me to help you with illegal activities. I want you to help me run an empire more efficiently, Vincent corrected. Some aspects of that empire operate in grey areas of legality. Some don't. And if I refuse? Vincent's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the atmosphere. Then you continue as my housekeeper, with the understanding that certain knowledge creates certain obligations. Either way, Claire, you're part of my world now. The question is whether you'll be a participant or merely a witness. Claire understood the implications. She'd learned too much about Vincent DeLuca to simply walk away and return to her quiet life of invisibility. He would need her silence, which meant he would need her loyalty, which meant her fate was now tied to his, whether she chose it or not. What exactly would this work involve? Analysis. Problem-solving. Using that brilliant mind for something more meaningful than organizing books and preparing meals. Vincent leaned forward. When's the last time you used your real abilities, Claire? When's the last time you solved problems that mattered? The question hit harder than she'd expected. Claire had been intellectually starving for 2 years, reduced to domestic tasks that, while honest work left her mind unchallenged and her potential unrealized. It's dangerous, she said quietly. Everything worthwhile is dangerous. The question is whether you'd rather face that danger as an active participant or a passive observer. Their meals arrived, perfection on fine china, but Claire barely tasted her food. She was calculating, weighing risks and possibilities with the same analytical approach she'd once applied to mathematical theorems. If I agree, she said finally, I want certain guarantees. My safety, my independence, and complete honesty about what I'm involving myself in. Vincent's smile was approval and promise combined. Agreed, on all counts. And if I ever want out, then you walk away. No questions, no retaliation, no consequences. You have my word. Claire studied his face, reading the sincerity in his expression. In her academic life, she'd grown skilled at reading people, at detecting deception and hidden agendas. Everything she saw in Vincent's eyes suggested he meant exactly what he'd promised. 1 week trial, she said. I'll try your work for 1 week. If it's not what I expected, I return to housekeeping with no hard feelings. 1 week, Vincent agreed, extending his hand across the table. Claire shook it, understanding that this handshake marked the end of her quiet, invisible life and the beginning of something far more complex and dangerous. What she didn't understand yet was how completely this decision would change not just her work, but her heart. Vincent's legitimate office occupied the top floor of a downtown Chicago high-rise, with sweeping views of the city and Lake Michigan. Claire arrived Monday morning to find a workspace that rivaled any university research facility, multiple computer monitors, mathematical software, financial databases, and resources she hadn't had access to since leaving Northwestern. Your domain, Vincent said, gesturing toward the sophisticated setup. Maria will show you the security protocols. Everything you need should be here. But if it's not, ask. Maria Rossi, Vincent's executive assistant, was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an efficient manner that suggested she'd been managing Vincent's complex life for years. She handed Claire a folder containing access codes, security guidelines, and an overview of current projects. Professor Sullivan, Maria said with surprising warmth, Mr. DeLuca has told me about your background. It's a pleasure to have someone with your qualifications on the team. The first project Vincent assigned her was ostensibly legitimate, optimizing shipping routes for a chain of import businesses. But as Claire delved into the data, patterns emerged that suggested these weren't ordinary commercial operations. The timing was too precise, the profits too high, the security measures too elaborate. She was analyzing transportation logistics for activities she preferred not to examine too closely. By Wednesday, Claire had increased route efficiency by 12% and identified potential cost savings that would amount to substantial profits. She presented her findings to Vincent in his office, watching his expression change from impressed to genuinely surprised. 12%, he repeated, studying her charts and projections. My team estimated we might achieve 5% optimization with the best possible scenario. Your team was thinking conventionally, Claire replied. You asked for sophisticated analysis, so I applied advanced mathematical modeling to unconventional variables. Vincent leaned back in his chair, his gaze moving from the reports to Claire's face. unconventional variables, weather patterns, traffic analysis, seasonal labor fluctuations, regional economic indicators. Standard shipping companies don't factor in the complexity of underground market dynamics, but that doesn't mean mathematical principles don't apply. You understand what these routes actually transport. It wasn't a question. Claire set down her pen and met his stare directly. I understand enough to know I shouldn't ask for specifics, but optimization is optimization, regardless of cargo. And you're comfortable with that? Claire considered carefully. I'm comfortable with the intellectual challenge. I'm comfortable with the professional respect. I'm comfortable with using my abilities for something meaningful after 2 years of underemployment. But I need to understand the boundaries, what I'm willing to optimize versus what I won't touch. Vincent stood and walked to his window wall, hands clasped behind his back. Chicago spread out below them, a city where legitimate business and underground operations coexisted in complex layers. Violence, he said without turning around. I won't ask you to analyze anything that directly facilitates harm to people. My family's operations focus on services, not territory disputes or intimidation. Services, import facilitation, financial consultation, dispute resolution, protection services. Vincent faced her again. We provide what people need when conventional systems fail them. Claire understood the euphemisms. Vincent's organization offered solutions to problems that couldn't be addressed through legal channels. Not necessarily violent solutions, but definitely illegal ones. And my role would be making these services more efficient. Your role would be solving problems that require someone with your analytical capabilities. Yes, some of those problems exist because we operate outside conventional business models, but nothing I would ask you to optimize would involve direct harm to innocent people. That afternoon, Claire found herself alone in Vincent's office while he attended a meeting downstairs. She'd been reviewing financial projections when her curiosity got the better of her. The differential equation he'd challenged her with that first day was still on his desk, marked with additional notes in his handwriting. She picked up the paper and realized Vincent had been exploring multiple solution approaches, testing different variables and outcomes. This wasn't just a random challenge. It was a problem he'd been genuinely working on himself. Mathematical modeling for risk assessment, Vincent said from the doorway. Claire startled, dropping the paper. I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to... You were curious. Vincent entered and closed the door behind him. The same curiosity that made you an exceptional professor and makes you valuable to me now. You've been working on this equation for weeks, Claire observed. Months. Vincent moved to stand beside her close enough that she caught his cologne again. I have a master's degree in mathematics from the University of Chicago, class of 2005. Claire stared at him. You went to graduate school? My father insisted all his children understand legitimate business before learning the family trade. He believed education was the foundation of everything else. Vincent's expression grew distant. I was supposed to use that degree in the family's legal enterprises. Life had other plans. The family trade, Claire repeated. My father was murdered when I was 26. 2 weeks after I'd defended my thesis and accepted a position with a Chicago consulting firm. Vincent's voice was matter-of-fact, but Claire heard the old pain beneath the words. Suddenly I was responsible for operations I'd never wanted to inherit. You could have refused, sold the businesses, walked away. Vincent's laugh held no humor. You don't walk away from family obligations in my world. And by the time I understood what I'd inherited, I also understood that hundreds of people depended on our operations for their livelihoods. Not just employees, but families, communities, entire neighborhoods. Claire saw Vincent clearly for the first time, not just as the dangerous criminal she'd assumed him to be, but as a man who'd been thrust into circumstances beyond his choosing and was trying to navigate them with whatever honor was possible. The equation, she said softly. What were you trying to solve? Territory optimization. How to maintain operations without expanding into areas that would create conflict with rival organizations. Vincent picked up the paper, studying her elegant solution. Your approach maintains efficiency while minimizing confrontation. Mathematical diplomacy, Claire said with a slight smile. Exactly. Vincent looked at her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. You understand the true challenge. Not just optimizing operations, but finding solutions that preserve peace. In that moment, standing close enough to see the complexity in his grey eyes, Claire realized she was no longer just intellectually intrigued by Vincent DeLuca. She was drawn to the man who used mathematical principles to avoid violence, who had inherited darkness, but was trying to find light within it. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying, because falling for her dangerous employer was exactly the kind of complication that could destroy everything she'd worked to rebuild. By Friday of her first week, Claire had revolutionized 3 major operational processes and identified cost-saving strategies that would increase profits by over $2 million annually. She'd also discovered that working with Vincent was the most intellectually stimulating experience she'd had since her academic career ended. More dangerously, she'd discovered that Vincent DeLuca was far more complex than the criminal boss she'd initially feared. They'd fallen into a routine of working late together, reviewing projects over dinner in his office while the rest of the building emptied. Vincent was brilliant, not just intelligent, but possessed of the kind of mathematical intuition that made complex problems seem elegant and solvable. "You're wasted on route optimization," Vincent said, over Chinese takeout on Friday evening. They'd been reviewing her analysis of financial structures for the family's legitimate businesses. "I thought that was exactly what you hired me to do. I hired you to think. The specific application is less important than having someone who can see solutions I miss." Claire set down her chopsticks and studied Vincent's face. "What kind of solutions are you looking for? Growth without expansion, profit without increased risk, influence without confrontation." Vincent's expression grew serious. "The old ways of conducting business in my world involved territory disputes and intimidation. I want to prove there's a more sophisticated approach. You want to reform organized crime through mathematical optimization. I want to survive in a changing world where the old rules no longer work." Vincent stood and walked to his window wall, looking out over the city lights. "Technology has changed everything. Law enforcement is smarter, more connected. The traditional approaches that worked for my father's generation are becoming impossible to sustain." Claire joined him at the window, standing close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "So you're adapting." "I'm trying to. The question is whether I'm smart enough to succeed before the old-school families decide I'm too much of a threat to their traditional methods." "What happens if they make that decision?" Vincent's reflection in the glass looked grim. "Then mathematical optimization becomes irrelevant, and we return to the ancient solution of superior firepower." The casual way he mentioned violence sent a chill through Claire. She'd been so focused on the intellectual challenges and Vincent's obvious intelligence that she'd momentarily forgotten the dangerous realities of his world. "I should go home," she said quietly. "Claire." Vincent turned to face her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "This week, working with you, it's reminded me of who I was before I inherited all this. The man who solved problems with logic instead of intimidation. Vincent, I know this is complicated. I know my world is dangerous and you didn't choose to be part of it, but I need you to understand something." He stepped closer, close enough that Claire had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "You're not just solving business problems for me. You're helping me find solutions that don't require violence, that don't compromise the man I'm trying to remain despite everything I'm responsible for." The intensity in his voice, the vulnerability beneath his usual control, made Claire's heart race. She was falling for Vincent DeLuca, and that was the most dangerous development of all. "This changes everything between us," she whispered. "Everything already changed the moment you solved that equation." Vincent's hand moved to touch her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with surprising gentleness. "The question is whether we acknowledge what's happening between us, or continue pretending it's purely professional." Claire leaned into his touch, despite every rational instinct screaming warnings. "I can't afford to make emotional decisions. I've rebuilt my life very carefully since losing my career. Getting involved with me is the most honest thing that's happened to either of us in years," Vincent interrupted. "I see you, Claire, the brilliant professor, the practical survivor, the woman who finds elegant solutions to impossible problems. And you see me, not just the reputation or the power or the danger, but the man trying to use mathematics to avoid becoming a monster." Before Claire could respond, Vincent's office phone rang with the sharp urgency that indicated emergency priority. He answered with a clipped, "DeLuca." Claire watched his expression change from intimate warmth to cold calculation as he listened to whoever was calling. "When?" Vincent's voice was deadly quiet. "How many?" A pause. "Double security at all locations, now." He ended the call, and immediately began gathering files from his desk, his movements efficient and controlled. "What's wrong?" Claire asked. "The Romano family made a move against one of our shipping operations tonight. 3 of my men are in the hospital and 2 trucks were destroyed." Vincent's tone was conversational, but Claire could see the tension in his shoulders. "It seems they've decided my modern approaches are a sign of weakness." The romantic tension that had filled the room moments earlier evaporated, replaced by the stark reminder of Vincent's actual circumstances. Claire realized she'd been seduced by the intellectual challenge and Vincent's obvious intelligence, but she was still dealing with a man whose life involved violence and retaliation. "What happens now?" she asked. Vincent's smile was cold and calculating. "Now I prove that mathematical optimization doesn't make me weak. It makes me efficient." The change in his demeanor was immediate and complete. This wasn't the thoughtful man who'd been discussing mathematical solutions moments earlier. This was Vincent DeLuca, crime boss, responding to a direct threat against his operations. Claire understood that her week of intellectual paradise was about to collide with the brutal realities of the world she'd chosen to enter, and she had no idea whether she was strong enough to survive what came next. The next morning, Claire arrived at Vincent's office to find it transformed into a command center. Maps covered every surface, phones rang constantly, and men in expensive suits moved with military precision. The intellectual sanctuary where she'd spent the week solving mathematical problems had become the headquarters for something far more dangerous. Vincent stood at the center of it all, orchestrating responses with calm authority that both impressed and terrified Claire. He wore a charcoal suit that emphasized his commanding presence, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the calculated way he positioned himself with clear sightlines to all entrances. "Professor," he acknowledged when she entered, but his attention remained focused on the tactical discussion with his advisors. Claire recognized several faces from previous weeks. Marco Tessari, Vincent's consigliere, a silver-haired man whose quiet intelligence reminded her of senior faculty colleagues. Antonio Greco, his underboss, younger and more obviously dangerous, with scars that told stories she didn't want to hear. "The Romano hit wasn't random," Marco was saying. "They targeted our most efficient route, the one with the highest profit margins. Someone provided them with detailed operational intelligence." "Inside information," Vincent's voice was deadly quiet. "Which means someone in our organization is feeding intelligence to our rivals." Claire felt suddenly out of place in this world of betrayal and retaliation. She started to retreat toward her workspace, but Vincent's voice stopped her. "Claire, a moment." She approached cautiously, aware that every man in the room was assessing her presence. In the past week, she'd become comfortable in Vincent's legitimate business environment. This gathering reminded her that his empire extended far beyond mathematical optimization. "The route analysis you completed," Vincent said, showing her a map marked with red X's. "The Romanos hit precisely the locations you identified as highest value targets." The implication hit Claire like a physical blow. "You think I think your analysis was so accurate that it could serve as a perfect blueprint for sabotage," Vincent interrupted, his grey eyes studying her reaction carefully. "The question is whether that analysis has been compromised or whether you've been providing information to people who shouldn't have it." Claire's academic background had prepared her for intellectual challenges, not accusations of criminal conspiracy. She felt heat rise in her cheeks as the dangerous men around Vincent studied her with suspicious eyes. "I've shared that analysis with no one outside this office," she said, lifting her chin with the dignity that had carried her through academic adversity. "My work has been exclusively for your organization." "Then we have a leak somewhere else in our information chain," Marco observed. "Which is actually more dangerous than external espionage." Vincent nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving Claire's face. She realized he was reading her, testing her reaction, determining whether she could be trusted in this crisis situation. "Marco, run background checks on everyone who had access to Professor Sullivan's reports," Vincent commanded. "Antonio, increase security protocols for all ongoing operations. I want to know who knew what and when they knew it." The men dispersed with efficient purpose, leaving Claire alone with Vincent in the transformed office. The mathematical elegance of their previous work felt like a distant memory in the face of this stark reminder of his actual business. "You're questioning my loyalty," Claire said quietly. "I'm questioning everything," Vincent replied, moving to stand before the wall of windows. "In my world, survival depends on trusting the right people and eliminating threats before they destroy you." "And which category do I fall into?" Vincent turned to face her, and Claire saw something unexpected in his expression, not suspicion but concern. You fall into a category I'm not sure how to handle. You're brilliant enough to be dangerous, honest enough to be trusted, and important enough to be protected. Important to your business operations. Important to me, Vincent corrected. And the personal admission hung in the air between them like a confession. Before Claire could respond, Vincent's phone buzzed with a priority alert. He answered immediately, his expression growing darker as he listened. When? His voice was controlled fury. How many casualties? Claire watched Vincent's face change as he received whatever information was being delivered. The intellectual man she'd been falling for disappeared, replaced by someone harder and more dangerous. Double the security detail for Professor Sullivan, Vincent commanded into the phone. Effective immediately. He ended the call and turned to Claire with an expression that made her stomach drop. The Romanos just hit another location. This time they left a message specifically mentioning you. What kind of message? They know about our new mathematical consultant. They know you're the one optimizing our operations. Vincent's jaw tightened. And they've decided you represent a threat that needs to be eliminated. Claire felt the world shift beneath her feet. In the space of 1 week, she'd gone from invisible housekeeper to wanted target of a criminal organization. The intellectual challenge she'd found so compelling had just become a death sentence. They want to kill me because I made your shipping routes more efficient. They want to kill you because you represent everything they're afraid of. Intelligence over intimidation, strategy over violence, evolution over tradition. Vincent approached her slowly, as if she might flee at any sudden movement. And because eliminating you would cripple my ability to modernize operations, they see as a threat to their old-school methods. So I'm a target because I'm good at my job. You're a target because you're changing my world in ways that threaten people who profit from chaos and inefficiency. Vincent reached out to touch her face, the gentleness of the gesture contrasting sharply with the danger surrounding them. I'm sorry, Claire. I never intended for this work to put you in direct peril. Claire leaned into his touch, despite her fear. What happens now? Now you have two choices. I can arrange for you to disappear completely. New identity. Relocation. Full protection but permanent separation from your current life. Or you stay, accept protection, and we solve this problem together. The choice was exactly what Claire had feared from the beginning. Total safety meant abandoning everything she'd built, including the intellectual fulfillment and growing feelings for Vincent that had made her feel alive again. Staying meant accepting danger she'd never chosen, but also preserving the connection that had become more important than she'd realized. If I stay, what kind of protection are we talking about? Vincent's smile was grim, but determined. The kind that makes you safer than the president. Round-the-clock security, secure housing, complete monitoring of potential threats, and my personal guarantee that anyone who tries to harm you will face consequences that will serve as permanent deterrent to others. Claire understood the implications. Accepting Vincent's protection meant fully entering his world, with all the moral compromises and dangerous realities that entailed. I need time to think. You have until tomorrow morning, Vincent replied. The Romanos won't wait longer than that to make their next move. That evening, Claire sat in her apartment under the watchful eyes of two discreet security guards Vincent had posted outside her building. Everything looked the same. Her modest furniture, her beloved mathematics books, her quiet life. But nothing felt the same. She was no longer just Claire Sullivan, unemployed professor trying to survive. She was Vincent DeLuca's mathematical consultant, marked for elimination by rival criminals who saw her intelligence as a weapon. Her phone rang at exactly 9 o'clock. Have you decided? Vincent's voice was carefully controlled. I'm still thinking. Think faster. My sources indicate Romano activity increasing throughout the evening. They're planning something for tomorrow. Claire moved to her window, seeing one of Vincent's security men positioned across the street. The protection felt both comforting and surreal. Vincent, can I ask you something? Anything. If you could have chosen any life, any path, what would you have picked? The silence stretched so long, Claire thought he might not answer. Architecture, he said finally. I wanted to design buildings that would last centuries. Create structures that combined function with beauty. Leave something permanent and positive in the world. You still could. After all this, you could sell your businesses, use your legitimate profits to start over. Vincent's laugh held no humor. You don't retire from my world, Claire. You either die in it or disappear from it, and disappearing requires giving up everyone and everything you care about. Everyone you care about, Claire repeated softly. Yes. The single word carried weight that made Claire's heart race. Vincent was telling her, without saying it directly, that she'd become someone he cared about enough that leaving would require abandoning her. If I stay, if I accept protection and continue working with you, what does that make me? It makes you mine to protect, Vincent replied immediately, in every sense of that phrase. Claire understood the implications. Accepting Vincent's protection would create a bond that went beyond employer and consultant, beyond the intellectual connection they'd discovered. It would make her part of his world permanently. And if the mathematical optimization isn't enough, if the violence escalates despite our sophisticated approaches, then I do whatever necessary to keep you safe, regardless of the cost. The promise in his voice was both thrilling and terrifying. Claire realized she was standing at the edge of a precipice, with safety and emptiness behind her, and danger and passion ahead. I'll give you my answer tomorrow morning, she said. Claire. Vincent's voice dropped to something intimate and urgent. Whatever you decide, you need to understand something. And this week, working with you, seeing your brilliant mind applied to impossible problems, it's shown me possibilities I'd forgotten existed. You've reminded me that intelligence and honor can coexist, even in my world. Vincent, let me finish. I'm falling for you, Professor Sullivan, not just your mind. Though your intelligence is breathtaking, you, the woman who faces impossible situations with dignity and courage, the person who finds elegant solutions where others see only chaos. Claire's breath caught. That's not fair. You can't tell me that now, when I'm trying to make a rational decision about my safety. Nothing about this situation is fair or rational, Vincent replied. But it's honest. And I thought you deserved honesty before you choose your future. After Vincent ended the call, Claire sat in her quiet apartment, surrounded by the life she'd carefully rebuilt after losing her academic career. Safe, modest, intellectually starved but predictable. Tomorrow morning, she would choose between preserving that safety and stepping fully into Vincent's dangerous world. The choice should have been obvious. Self-preservation demanded accepting relocation and protection that would separate her from Vincent forever. But as Claire reviewed the week they'd spent solving problems together, the intellectual communion she'd found with him, the growing attraction that had complicated everything, she realized the choice wasn't about safety versus danger. It was about existing versus truly living. At midnight, her decision crystallized with mathematical certainty. Claire arrived at Vincent's office building the next morning to find it transformed into a fortress. Security guards checked identification at multiple points. Metal detectors had been installed overnight, and every person entering was thoroughly screened. Vincent was taking no chances with her safety. She found him in his office, studying surveillance reports with the same focused intensity he'd once applied to mathematical equations. He looked up when she entered, and she saw relief flash across his features before his expression returned to controlled neutrality. "You came back," he said simply. "I came back," Claire confirmed, setting her purse down and moving to stand before his desk. "I'm staying, Vincent. I'm accepting your protection and continuing our work." Vincent stood slowly, as if sudden movement might change her mind. "You understand what this means? The danger, the lifestyle changes, the fact that your life will never be simple again. I understand that running away means giving up the first meaningful work I've done in 2 years, and the first person who's made me feel intellectually alive since I left academia." Claire lifted her chin with determination. "I also understand that I'd rather face danger with someone I trust than safety with people I don't know." Something transformed in Vincent's expression, relief, gratitude, and something deeper that made Claire's pulse quicken. He moved around the desk to stand before her, close enough that she could see the silver threads in his dark hair, the lines around his eyes that spoke of responsibilities most people couldn't imagine. "There's something you need to know," Vincent said, his voice carefully controlled. "Last night, my security team intercepted Romano communications. They're not just targeting you as a business consultant. They've identified you as someone important to me personally." "Important to you personally," Claire repeated. "Which means they see eliminating you as a way to cause me emotional damage, as well as operational disruption." Vincent's jaw tightened. "In my world, caring about someone makes them a weapon that can be used against you." Claire felt the full weight of what she was accepting. Not just physical danger, but the burden of knowing that her safety was tied to Vincent's enemy's desire to hurt him personally. How do we handle that? By making you untouchable, Vincent replied, reaching into his desk drawer. There's a tradition in my world, a form of protection that even rival families respect. He pulled out a small velvet box, and Claire's breath caught. Inside was a ring. Not a traditional engagement ring, but something more meaningful in Vincent's world. A significant emerald surrounded by diamonds, obviously expensive, but more importantly, obviously symbolic. "Vincent, what are you—" "I'm claiming you publicly," Vincent said, taking the ring from the box, "in a way that makes harming you an act of war against my entire organization, not just a business disruption." Claire stared at the ring, understanding its implications. This wasn't a romantic proposal, though romance was certainly part of it. This was Vincent offering her the ultimate protection his world could provide, the status of being under his personal care. "You're asking me to be your wife." "I'm asking you to be my partner in every sense of that word," Vincent corrected. "Intellectually, professionally, and personally. The woman who stands beside me as we transform how business is conducted in this world. And if I say yes, then you become Claire DeLuca, the most protected woman in Chicago. No one touches you without facing the full force of my organization's retaliation." Vincent's eyes were intense, searching. "But more than that, you become the person who helps me build something better than what I inherited." Claire looked at the ring, then back at Vincent's face. A week ago, she'd been an invisible housekeeper with no prospects beyond paying her bills. Now she was being offered partnership with one of Chicago's most powerful men, work that challenged her intellectual capabilities, and protection that came with a price she was only beginning to understand. "There's one condition," she said quietly. "Name it. No violence unless absolutely necessary for protection. I won't be party to unnecessary brutality, no matter how traditional it might be in your world." Vincent's smile was approval and promise combined. "Agreed. Violence as a last resort. Intelligence as the primary weapon." "Then yes," Claire said, extending her hand. "Yes, I'll be your partner in all of this." Vincent slipped the ring onto her finger, and Claire felt the weight of it. Not just the physical weight, but the symbolic significance of what she'd just committed herself to. The emerald caught the morning light streaming through the office windows, beautiful and binding. Before either could speak, Vincent's office door opened, and Marco Tesseri entered with urgency that meant trouble. "Boss, we have a situation. Romano forces are moving on 3 of our locations simultaneously. It's a coordinated assault designed to—" Marco stopped when he saw the ring on Claire's hand, his expression shifting to surprised approval. "Congratulations, the timing is fortuitous." "How so?" Vincent asked, his arm moving protectively around Claire's waist. "Because attacking Vincent DeLuca's fiancée requires the approval of the full Romano Leadership Council. Without that approval, it's an act that will unite every family in Chicago against them." Marco's smile was sharp with political understanding. "They'll have to call off any immediate plans against Professor Sullivan while they debate whether targeting her is worth a citywide war." Claire realized Vincent had just protected her through strategy rather than violence, using the political structures of his world to create a shield around her. The ring on her finger wasn't just jewelry, it was a tactical maneuver that bought them time and safety. "How long do we have?" Vincent asked. "Days, maybe weeks, depending on how long their council takes to reach consensus," Marco replied. "Long enough to plan our next moves carefully." Vincent nodded, then turned to Claire. "Ready for your first lesson in being a DeLuca?" Claire looked at the ring, at Vincent's determined expression, at Marco's respectful nod, and realized she'd just stepped fully into a world that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself. "Ready," she said, and meant it. The Romano family council meeting took place 3 days later, in a warehouse on the south side, far from the sophisticated downtown offices where Vincent conducted his business. Claire knew about the meeting because Vincent had shown her the intelligence reports, part of her education in understanding the world she'd chosen to enter. "They're debating whether eliminating you is worth triggering a war that would involve every major family in Chicago," Vincent explained as they reviewed the surveillance data in his home office. They'd moved their operations to his mansion for security reasons, and Claire was still adjusting to living under round-the-clock protection. "And what's your assessment?" Claire asked, studying the photographs of the men who were deciding her fate. "My assessment is that Antonio Romano is old school and thinks violence solves everything. His nephew Salvatore is smarter and understands that killing you would accomplish nothing except uniting the entire city against them. Vincent pointed to different faces in the photos. The question is which perspective prevails in their decision-making. Claire found it surreal to discuss her potential murder as an intellectual exercise, but she was learning that emotional detachment was necessary for survival in Vincent's world. "What do we do while they debate?" "We plan for every possible outcome," Vincent replied. "And we use the time to strengthen our position." That evening, Vincent took Claire to dinner at an exclusive restaurant where she met the other significant figures in Chicago's underground hierarchy. Not a social gathering, but a strategic display of alliances and power. Claire wore a black dress Vincent had provided and the emerald engagement ring that announced her protected status to everyone present. "Mrs. DeLuca," said Carmen Valdez, wife of the city's most successful import facilitator, "Vincent tells me you're responsible for the remarkable efficiency improvements in his operations." "Mathematical optimization," Claire replied carefully. "I enjoy solving complex logistical problems." "How refreshing," Carmen smiled. "Intelligence is so much more elegant than intimidation, don't you think?" The evening continued with similar conversations. Wives and partners of powerful men, all of them obviously intelligent, all of them navigating the delicate balance between supporting their husband's dangerous work and maintaining their own identities. Claire realized she was being welcomed into a sophisticated community of women who understood exactly what she'd committed herself to. During dessert, Vincent's phone buzzed with a priority message. He read it quickly, his expression growing serious. "Excuse us," Vincent said politely, standing and helping Claire from her chair. "Business calls." They moved to a private alcove where Vincent could speak without being overheard. "The Romano Council reached a decision," he said quietly. 50-50 split. Antonio wants you eliminated as a symbol. Salvatore wants negotiations to prevent war." "What does that mean?" "It means they're sending an emissary tomorrow to propose terms for coexistence. If negotiations succeed, you're safe. If they fail, then they move forward with elimination," Claire finished. Vincent nodded. "But here's the crucial part. The emissary they're sending is Salvatore himself, the smart nephew who's been arguing against violence. Is that good or bad?" "It's an opportunity," Vincent said with the same focused intensity he'd once applied to mathematical problems. "Salvatore responds to intelligence and strategy. He's exactly the kind of person who would appreciate our optimization approaches." Claire understood immediately. "You want me to be part of the negotiations. Show him that mathematical efficiency benefits everyone, not just our operations. I want you to demonstrate that cooperation creates more profit than confrontation," Vincent confirmed. "Turn this from a territorial dispute into a business optimization opportunity." The next morning, Salvatore Romano arrived at Vincent's office with minimal security and obvious intention to negotiate rather than threaten. He was younger than Claire had expected, perhaps 40, with intelligent eyes and an expensive suit that suggested sophisticated business sense. "Miss Sullivan," Salvatore acknowledged her presence with respectful courtesy. "I've heard impressive things about your analytical capabilities." "Mr. Romano," Claire replied, noting how Vincent positioned himself where he could react instantly to any threat. "I understand you're here to discuss optimizing territorial arrangements." "Among other things," Salvatore smiled. "I'm curious about your route efficiency improvements. My uncle sees them as weapons designed to undermine our operations. I see them as innovations that might benefit everyone if properly applied." Claire recognized the opening Vincent had hoped for. Mathematical optimization isn't zero-sum. Efficiency improvements in one organization can create opportunities for partnership rather than competition. For the next hour, Claire presented her analysis of how cooperative logistics could benefit both families more than territorial competition. She showed Salvatore calculations demonstrating increased profits for all parties, reduced law enforcement attention, and minimized conflict costs. Vincent watched with obvious pride as Claire transformed potential enemies into interested business partners, using intellectual persuasion instead of threatened violence. "Remarkable," Salvatore said when Claire finished her presentation. "You've identified profit opportunities that neither family has considered, because you've been viewing each other as competition rather than potential collaborators," Claire replied. "Mathematical analysis suggests cooperation creates exponentially better outcomes than confrontation." Salvatore looked at Vincent with new respect. This is why you wanted to modernize operations. Not weakness, but sophistication. Intelligence over intimidation, Vincent confirmed. Strategy over violence. My uncle won't like this approach, Salvatore warned. He believes in traditional methods. Then perhaps it's time for leadership that understands modern realities, Claire said boldly, earning sharp looks from both men. Salvatore's smile was slow and dangerous. Professor Sullivan, you've just suggested that I should consider removing my uncle from decision-making authority. Claire realized she'd overstepped, moving from mathematical consultation into political strategy. But Vincent's approving expression suggested she'd identified the solution everyone was dancing around. I suggested that effective leadership requires understanding current conditions, Claire replied carefully. Mathematical optimization sometimes requires changing variables that are no longer functional. Salvatore laughed genuinely. Vincent, your fiancée is not only brilliant but diplomatically gifted. I can see why you're willing to go to war to protect her. The meeting ended with tentative agreements for cooperation, and Salvatore's promise to handle his uncle's opposition through internal family politics rather than external violence. As he prepared to leave, Salvatore turned to Claire with obvious respect. Mrs. De Luca, if you ever decide to change employers, my family would be honored to retain your services. After Salvatore left, Vincent pulled Claire into his arms, his relief and pride evident. You just prevented a war through mathematics and diplomacy, he said, his voice rough with emotion. We prevented a war, Claire corrected, by proving that intelligence creates better solutions than violence. Vincent kissed her then, deeply and completely, and Claire realized that somewhere in the process of solving his business problems, she'd found exactly where she belonged. 2 weeks later, Claire stood before the mirror in Vincent's master bedroom, adjusting the pearl necklace he'd given her for their wedding. Not the massive society ceremony she might once have imagined, but an intimate gathering of family and close associates who understood that this marriage represented far more than personal happiness. The ceremony would take place in the mansion's garden, with Father DeMarco presiding, a priest who'd served the De Luca family for 2 generations and understood the complexities of their world. Claire had insisted on writing her own vows, wanting words that reflected the unusual foundation of their partnership. Ready? Vincent appeared behind her in the mirror, and magnificent in a tailored black tuxedo that emphasized his commanding presence. But it was the expression in his eyes that took Claire's breath away, not the calculating crime boss, but the man who'd found redemption through love and mathematics. Ready, Claire confirmed, turning to face him. Though I never imagined my wedding day would include security sweeps and bulletproof car windows, I never imagined mine would include a bride who could optimize criminal enterprises through differential equations, Vincent replied, offering his arm. Yet, here we are. The garden ceremony was perfect. Elegant flowers, soft music, and 30 guests who represented the most powerful criminal families in Chicago, all gathered to witness what many saw as a new era in how business would be conducted. Marco Tessari served as Vincent's best man, while Carmen Valdez stood with Claire as her matron of honor. Even Salvatore Romano attended, his presence a symbol of the peace Claire's mathematical diplomacy had helped achieve. When Father DeMarco asked for their vows, Claire spoke first. Vincent, when you challenged me with that mathematical equation, you changed more than just my employment status. You showed me that intelligence and honor could coexist, even in the most challenging circumstances. You gave me problems worth solving and a partnership worth building. I promise to stand with you as we create something better than what we inherited, using our minds instead of violence, strategy instead of intimidation. Vincent's vows were equally personal and equally political. Claire, you reminded me who I wanted to be before circumstances forced me to become someone else. You showed me that evolution is possible, that tradition and innovation could work together to create something unprecedented. I promise to protect you, cherish your brilliant mind, and build with you a legacy based on intelligence rather than fear. The kiss that sealed their marriage was witnessed by Chicago's most dangerous men, all of whom understood they were watching the symbolic birth of a new approach to power. During the reception, Claire moved through conversations with wives and associates, feeling truly comfortable in Vincent's world for the first time. She'd found her place not as an outsider trying to adapt, but as a partner helping to reshape the culture from within. Mrs. De Luca, Antonio Greco approached with obvious respect. The shipping route optimizations you designed have increased our profits by 30%, while reducing law enforcement attention by half. The men wanted me to express their appreciation. Thank you, Antonio, but the real achievement is proving that cooperation creates better outcomes than competition, which is why the Romano family formally requested a partnership meeting next month, Marco added, joining their conversation. Salvatore convinced his uncle that mathematical efficiency serves everyone's interests. Claire smiled, understanding that her intellectual approach had accomplished what decades of territorial disputes couldn't achieve: sustainable peace through mutual profit optimization. Later that evening, as the reception wound down and guests departed with respectful farewells, Vincent and Claire stood alone in the garden where they'd married. "Any regrets?" Vincent asked, pulling her close against him. "About marrying a crime boss? About choosing danger over safety? About using mathematics to optimize illegal operations?" Claire pretended to consider seriously. "Not a single one." "Good, because I have a wedding gift that's going to complicate your life even further." Vincent led her to his study, where a new set of blueprints covered his desk. "Architectural drawings," Claire realized, looking at the detailed designs with growing excitement. "What is this?" "Plans for the Vincent De Luca Institute for Mathematical Applications, a research facility where brilliant minds can solve real-world problems without traditional academic limitations." Vincent's smile was proud and hopeful. "Your wedding gift is the opportunity to build something legitimate and lasting while maintaining our other enterprises." Claire studied the plans with growing amazement. A state-of-the-art facility that would combine academic research with practical problem-solving, funded by Vincent's successful operations but focused on completely legal applications. "You're giving me a legitimate business to run alongside the illegal ones. I'm giving you the chance to prove that mathematical optimization can transform more than just criminal enterprises," Vincent corrected. "Urban planning, traffic management, resource distribution, environmental solutions, problems that could benefit entire communities." Claire realized Vincent had found a way to honor both parts of their partnership: her need for meaningful intellectual work and their mutual desire to create positive change despite the darker aspects of his world. "It's perfect," she whispered, studying the plans that represented unlimited possibilities. "Absolutely perfect. Just like you, Professor De Luca." As Vincent kissed her in the study where their relationship had begun with a mathematical challenge, Claire understood that she'd found something unprecedented: a love that honored both her intelligence and his honor, a partnership that transformed criminal tradition through academic innovation, and a future where mathematics and morality could coexist in ways that would benefit everyone. Outside, Chicago sparkled with nighttime lights, a city where crime and legitimacy had learned to cooperate through the elegant solutions of a former professor who'd fallen in love with a dangerous man and helped him become something extraordinary. The equation Vincent had written on that napkin months ago had been simple compared to the complex formula they'd created together: a marriage that solved for love while optimizing for honor, intelligence, and hope.